Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin and welcome back to the channel. Oftentimes when it comes to finance, we find ourselves asking the question of how much? How much of my paycheck should I be setting aside towards investments? How much do I need to have invested before I can reach financial freedom? How much of my income can I spend on housing? And another biggie, how much do I need to have set aside to cover an emergency fund? How much do I need to have in emergency savings? And oftentimes when we get responses to these questions, we get general guidelines or general rules of thumb. We don't tend to get exact figures. How much of your income should go towards investments? They tend to say around 15%. How do you know when you reached financial freedom? Well, we might lean into the 4% rule to figure that out. How much can you spend on housing? It's generally around 30% of your income or less. How much do you need in emergency savings? Well, to have you covered, they tend to say around 3 to 6 months worth of expenses. And all of these general guidelines are given because when you're giving information to the masses, it's very hard or impossible to give exact concrete figures because everyone's situation is so unique and so different. But I get it, sometimes people want an exact concrete figure. Well, for those who want a solid concrete answer on exactly how much they should have saved up in an emergency fund, Investopedia has answered this call. According to a recent set of calculations, Investopedia has a rock solid number that the typical American household would need set aside. And that is, drum roll please, $33,110.68 to be exact. No, I don't agree with that at all. And now don't get me wrong, I love Investopedia. I think they're an amazing news outlet and they have a wonderful set of tools for investors, but I don't agree with this article. And here's why. Because no one is quote unquote the typical American. There's a reason general guidelines are given, and that's because solid figures don't work for the masses. Let's first take a look at how Investopedia got to this number. We've got about $11,000 for medical care, COBRA premiums if you lose your job, about $10,000 for vehicles, about $9,000 for housing and utilities, and about $3,000 for groceries. And this looks at the cost of these categories over a 6-month period for a typical American household. Investopedia stresses that this is a conservative number, adding, "That should be a wake-up call for people," said Caleb Silver, editor-in-chief of Investopedia, on the struggle to save for an emergency. If you think savings are going to get you out of it, you have to have enough savings to get through it. And the reality is many Americans are not saving enough. If we look at savings based on Bankrate's 2024 Annual Emergency Savings Report, we see that 27% of people report having no savings whatsoever. 29% can cover 1 to 3 months worth of expenses. 16% can cover 3 to 5 months worth of expenses. And only 28% report being able to cover at least 6 months worth of expenses. So based on widely reported data, I think it's safe to say that the typical American is probably ill-prepared for a lengthy period of unemployment. We often see headlines like, "The typical American can't even cover an unexpected $400 emergency," which I did recently do a video on if you're interested in checking it out. When it comes to the topic of an emergency fund, it's important to remember that this topic and having an emergency fund in place carries a lot of weight. And there's a reason that we're given the general guidelines of 3 to 6 months worth of expenses. It's because it depends so heavily on your lifestyle factors and your lifestyle dynamics. If you live in a dual income household, you likely can lean more towards 3 months worth of expenses, as it's probably unlikely that both you and your partner would lose your jobs at the exact same time and then struggle to find new positions for the same length of time. If you live in a single income household, you may want to lean more towards that 6 months worth of expenses. However, there still is a lot of variability with this. Do you work in an industry that has a lot of variability or seasonality to it? You might need a bigger emergency fund. Or maybe you work in an industry that has a lot of reliability. For instance, let's say you're an active duty service member or a veteran with benefits. You probably have a reasonable degree of certainty that you're not going to lose your paycheck in the next month. Or consider the field you work in. Do you work in a field where if you lose your job, it would take a long time to find a new job, or would you readily be able to find a new job? Or what if you're a retiree or somebody who qualifies for Social Security? That creates a whole new element with a guaranteed income stream. Or let's say that you're somebody with multiple income streams. Well, that creates less of a reliance on any one single income stream, so that would mean you would need less in emergency savings. The other thing I really don't like about this $33,000 figure is when I look at the breakdown, those expenses don't match my expenses. The housing costs don't line up with my housing costs. I don't have an auto loan, so the auto category doesn't match. I have a pet, there was no category for pet in there. Quite simply, those numbers don't work for me. And I bet they don't work for you either. And I think it's kind of pointless to give people a goal to aim for that doesn't fit their life. What's important when it comes to your emergency fund is that you sit down and figure out what your expenses are and figure out a target that works for you. And importantly, when figuring out this number, I would make sure to base it off your expenses, not your income. Let's run a hypothetical example just like Investopedia did. Let's use the median household income, but for a dual income earning household. So as of 2024 in the US, the median household income for a dual income earning household is $106,000. We will assume that each partner brings home $53,000, so it's a 50-50 split. According to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, the median household expenses come to about $73,000 over the course of a year, including costs like housing, transportation, food, healthcare, personal essentials, and non-personal essentials. Now, if we look at just the essential expenses, excluding the non-essentials, over the course of a 6-month period, we get a pretty similar figure of about $30,264. But with a dual income earning household, it's unlikely that both of the partners lose their job at the same time. Not impossible, but unlikely. So for our example, we will assume that one partner loses their job. So now the household income is cut down to $53,000. There are big things to consider, like the person who has still maintained their job. Does their job supply healthcare for the family? That could have a big impact. But the good thing to note is that we still have a partner who has a job, so there's still a paycheck coming in. So this should mean we should be able to have a smaller emergency savings. So if one partner was out of a job for 6 months and one partner still had their $53,000 income coming in over the course of those 6 months, the household income would be about $26,500 pre-tax, and essential expenses would be about $30,000. Yes, taxes absolutely do matter because they would reduce your take-home pay, but I would also assume that this family would find ways to make cuts to their budget because at this point the budget is running leaner with one less paycheck. And as we can see here, with one income still coming in, yes, the family is operating in the red, but they're not depleting an entire 6-month emergency fund. There's a gap of a few $1,000s. No, I'm not saying that this household should only have a few $1,000s in an emergency fund, but we could easily say that maybe they would be better suited to have a 3-month emergency fund rather than a 6-month emergency fund. Something more in the ballpark of $15,000 rather than, say, the $30,000 for a 6-month emergency fund. And this certainly would have given this couple enough of a breathing room and they would have had their expenses covered while the other partner took 6 months to get back on their feet and find gainful employment. And even during that 6-month period with one partner being without a paycheck, they wouldn't have depleted an entire $15,000 3-month emergency fund. Now, I certainly don't want to suggest that this example is better than Investopedia's. Again, it's just another scenario that likely isn't reflective of your situation, but it does highlight that there's a wide range of what can be considered a fully funded emergency fund, depending on your situation. I do also think we have to be careful with assigning an exact figure to an emergency fund, simply because of how we talk about emergency funds in the investing community. So often we say that people need to have a fully funded emergency fund before they start their investing journey. And so if we say that someone needs to have $30,000 set aside in a high yield savings before they ever even begin investing, this might cause someone to delay investing for years. And when it comes to compounding, that can cost you dearly. One of the best things you can do when it comes to investing is get invested early. For instance, a 5-year delay in getting started investing, going from a 40-year investing career to a 35-year investing career, can greatly reduce your overall portfolio value. So how much do you need in an emergency fund? Well, a good rule of thumb is anywhere from 3 to 6 months worth of expenses. The best way to figure out your number is to sit down and actually look at your expenses. If you're deciding if you should be more towards the 3 end of the spectrum or more towards the 6-month end of the spectrum, well, there are a few things you should consider. Look at your household dynamics, look at the type of employment you have, look at your income streams. All of these factors matter. Also, just my 2 cents, and because I want everyone to be investing as early as possible, once you have 1 month's worth of emergency fund or expenses set aside, I think it's okay to start investing and contributing to building up your emergency savings at the same time. That way you get invested as early as possible and get your money working and compounding for you. What are your thoughts on an emergency fund? Share them in a comment down below. I post new videos every single week. If you got anything at all out of this one, please give it a like. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. Or if you know of someone who might get something out of this type of content, please consider sharing. I'll see you soon. Bye. Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin. Great start. Great start. Well, you might apply the rule of 4%. How much? No one is quote unquote the typical American. I put the quotes in the wrong spot. Shit.